This podcast is part of the Listen Frederick Podcast Network. To learn more, visit listenfrederick.com.
The Fedora Files.
Hello, I'm Gregory Fedora, and this is the Fedora Files. I am super excited to have you, and we are back into South Mountain Magic by Madeline Vinton Dahlgren. This week, we are going to jump into chapters 4 and 5. It's a fun few chapters, and I'm pumped about it. I really like these chapters. And we'll get into it here in a minute. The two chapters are chapter 4, Superstitions and Apparitions, and chapter 5 is Haunts and Idolum. So Haunts and Idolum and Superstitions and Apparitions. And I'm going to explain some definitions as we go along. But chapter 4, it starts out talking about the will-o-wisps and Jack with a lantern. And you get Jack-o'-lantern from this. In folklore, a will-o-wisp or the Ignis Fautus, Latin for giddy flame, is an atmospheric condition. It's called like a ghost light, and it's seen by a lot of travelers at night. It's a natural phenomenon, but back in the day, people weren't quite sure what it was. It's especially seen over bogs and swamps or marshes. In European folklore, it has a bunch of names other than will-o-wisp. It's like jack-o'-lantern, friar's lantern, the hinky punk. They believed it was like a spiritual thing, and it was like kind of tried to mislead travelers because it resembled like a flickering lamp or a lantern. And it would guide people into the bog or the swamp, and they drown usually because it's created by gases, swamp gases that come up and from decay of different vegetation, and it just sort of happens. It's a natural thing, and I actually have seen it when I was in Florida. I've seen it, but I've seen it in different places, and it is kind of scary. But it's an interesting thing here. Now, she then goes from talking about that to the Snarly Owl, which is the ghost dog of South Mountain. And ghost dogs are commonly seen occurrence around the world. There are a lot of tales of black, huge dogs that just vanish suddenly, show up. There's a lot of famous ones in Europe. And around America in the South and in the Northeast and Canada, Alaska, they all have these tales of either ghost dogs, ghost wolves, and they're just like evil looking dogs, scary. Some say they kill you, some just they scare you, stuff like that. Then after the Snarly Owl, she goes direct to the Dueo, which is really cool because the Dueo is one where a lot of people try to argue that he didn't really come into play until the 1950s and 60s, and that's not true. And she doesn't call it the Dueo. The term Dueo shows up in the 1950s and 60s. She calls it a werewolf, which I found kind of interesting because the hex wolf was a more commonly used term in that day. But I don't know if she just wasn't into it. But like in Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, that area, they believed in this hex wolf, which was like a werewolf type thing. It was not a person who by day was human, then at moonlight became the wolf. This person was either cursed and was always the hex wolf, or the hex wolf was just this entity that all existed. It wasn't necessarily that you became one. There's a lot of variations on this. But what I liked about it, though, was that it really went to show that the idea of this wolf humanoid, it actually has been around for many years, like back into the late 1700s, after the Snallygaster and after the Jersey Devil, the hex wolf kind of came into play. And then, so people just, they believed in this hex wolf type thing. And like I said, it wasn't until the 50s and 60s that they came up with the Dueo term, and then people kind of like argued that, well, the Dwale is this new monster, but not really. It's the Hex Wolf. It's the same thing. So Miss Dahlgren's inclusion of the werewolf shows that there was a well-known wolf monster in the area dating back, at least now, like you can find stories in the 1700s, but this dates to the 1800s, and she was talking about it. So it's interesting that we got to see that. Chapter 4, she gets into a lot of stories. She tells of a ghostly wagoneer, the white woman who is basically South Mountain's very own banshee, and is well known. There's numerous stories of that, and a lot of stories of the Snarly Owl. And people had all these encounters with the phantom dog. And so she does a lot of these phantom dog stories as well, you know. So it's kind of cool. She also tells a few other tales, one involving a Christmas spirit that was headless and carrying a large chain. Supposedly, the story dates back to the 1830s. So it actually predates the Dickens tale. There was a man named Lazarus who died and was doomed to walk the mountain with a chain because he was a thief. So it's a very Dickens type of thing where, you know, he's being punished in the afterlife for his deeds on earth, and he's doomed to walk South Mountain. And that's a story I had not heard before, and now it's kind of interesting. But the story is that he comes out at Christmas time, and so that's an interesting kind of a cool one to get into, and I'd love to see more of that one. Basically, this whole chapter is like just chuck full of stories, and it's like one after another. And most of these are they're short, just a couple paragraphs. Some are even just a couple sentences. So it's a fast read. It's all very interesting. Many people seem to have similar experiences with the Phantom Dog, but again, it's hard to say what was seen or not seen. And if it was some kind of status to say you encountered the creature. I I I don't want to detail, you know, too much of these stories, because as I've said before, you really should dive into this book and read them for yourself, whether you believe in ghosts, goblins, or ghouls, and find it interesting. You know, it to me it is interesting to see how people over 100 years ago were thinking and acting, and how they thought these things through. uh, it was really enlightening. And to me, it felt like sometimes these encounters were like a type of status. So, you know, we as a group haven't changed much. You know, nowadays we post memes or comments on social media to pump ourselves up, to be like, look at I post, I did this. It's funny, or it's poignant, or I've experienced this. I know what it's like to be in this situation. And it looks like back then the social media for them was, you know, these phantom dog encounters. Everybody had one. It's like, you dealt with the hex wolf or not, or the snarly owl. I did too. It ripped my pants, and then it pulled out a pair of ripped pants. Me like, snarly owl ripped mine. Oh, he ripped. Look, he see the scar. That's snarly owl. You know, so it kind of felt like, you know, that they kind of told these like snarly owl stories, and maybe some were real, but some may not have been. And it's just interesting to see, because a lot of them were like, each one was a little bit bigger deal than the previous. Like, so it's like she interviewed these people like, so Brian here, he had a snarly owl story, and she, you know, wrote it down. It was a couple sentences. And she went to Timmy over here, and she's like, yeah, Brian told me this. Oh, that's nothing. This is what happened to me. So it's really interesting to see where they went on that. And chapter 4's just got a lot of quick stories, and they're all really interesting, really fun, and just a good time to read, and be fun to just read them around the campfire, you know, and see if you see the snarly owl, you know, as you sit there. Now, the next chapter, as I said, is chapter 5. It's Haunts and Idolun, Idolun, Idolun. Yeah, if I say it right, you know, I had to look up how to pronounce it, and I never even heard of this term. So I thought, man, we got to look up what Idolum means. And it's a noun, and it has two different definitions. One is it's an idolized person or thing. Two, it's a specter or a phantom. And in ancient Greek literature, an eidolon is a spirit image of a living or dead person, a shade or a phantom, a look-alike of the human form. And then she gets right into this story. And the first story is this man, Henry, who saw his doppelganger, which is a look-alike. It's an eidolon. And he was 10 years old and he was on South Mountain. And it was frightening to him. It's scary because even today, like the idea of doppelgangers is usually not a good thing. And like sometimes we try and find our twin in the world, but these aren't like human twins. The doppelgangers, and especially back then, was a demon who was trying to take your place. So when you saw someone that looked like you, it was never a good thing because you knew if this thing took control, you were gonna die and it was gonna take over, and no one in your family knew. But then suddenly you're a jerk. People don't like you, and like, man, he's an blah blah blah. I can't really say exactly what they're gonna say because it's, I want kids to be able to watch this. But anyway, you get it. They're an a-hole, but it's not you. You've been killed and replaced by this demon, and that's what this kid was afraid of. And like, there's a few other stories in there. All these stories, they're longer. They're longer stories. This chapter, she also gets into the grand design of the world and of life, and she gets back to her Christian beliefs, and that the life was created by God, and we're part of this cosmic drama that's unfolded from creation, to the sacrifice of Christ, to all of these things. But then she turns and reminds us how Satan is out there trying to destroy the story and trying to destroy you. And she draws out the dichotomy of the world, of how there's light and there's dark, and she starts bringing it all together. um and this chapter is not as many like the previous chapters. There's a ton of stories. These are longer ones, so there's not as many. There's just a few, but these again are stories that are dictated to her, and she is simply retelling them. They're not made up by her. At least that's what she portrays in the book, that these were not fictional stories to her. These were tales told to her. Like the doppelganger story was told by Henry to her directly. And then she has a few other tales in here as well of different people and what they experienced on South Mountain and the different individuals they ran into. And these tales, they are darker, and they're more sinister in nature. They're not whimsical or fanciful like the Snarly Owl ones. They're dark, but they're kind of fun. They're kind of like, oh, these ones are not so fun. They're you kind of sense that she feels a darkness on South Mountain, and that the people who reside around there are the ones that keep the dark realm alive and well. So again, we're getting into the Zittel clan, the family. She doesn't really mention them, but you get the sense she's saying that there's a darkness here. And from previous chapters, we kind of know who she's blaming for this. It's an, chapter 4 and 5. It's interesting to me because there's a turning point in this book. Like the first few chapters, like I said, it's more upbeat. The stories are interesting. They're not really evil. They're just sort of like happy. They're funny. Some are funny, some are interesting. They're a little scary, but they're not anything over dark. It's not too dark. It's not something you'd be like, whoa, that sounds evil. But then it turns here. Now, I know she loves South Mountain and she loved her home here, but you really sense she had this fear going on, and this fear of what lurked in the shadows of the mountain. Again, the hex wolf, the Snarly Owl, they're there, but she's now seeing a darker side to it. In the previous chapter, it's a little like, fun little stories. Now we're turning. And I think this is where the book begins to turn, and we begin to see the darker side of South Mountain, the darker side of Madeline Dahlgren, where she's kind of obsessed with it, kind of like she's dug into this and she really is diving into the darkness here. And she doesn't like live out into the darkness, but this is a side that she really senses and feels, and she's into it and afraid of it, but at the same time drawn to it. And so chapter 4 and 5, really interesting. It's the turning point of the book. So it's not the climax it's just we've hit this peak, and now I think we're diving in a new direction. And it's exciting to see. And I hope you're enjoying this. I love reading this book. I've read it before. I'm reading it again. And I'm like really just getting a lot more out of it as I think about and I look up the world as it was in that time period to really figure out what she's talking about, looking up the terminology she's talking about, because I think it really helps us understand. It gives me new words to use, like idolon. And, idolon. I'm going to use that now. It's like, man, you're my idolon, but anyway, maybe I won't. But it's an interesting take. And again, I'm learning a lot. I'm learning stuff about myself because it's like I said, it makes me think about how I do things, how I think things through, and how I may judge or prejudge a situation just from previous things. But thank you again for stopping by, checking us out. We got 2 more chapters to go, and I think I'm going to double it down again. And then I got a couple new guests I got coming up that I'm really excited to have in the next couple weeks. So check it out. Please go to my YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, check out the shorts of the different monsters that we got coming, because every couple days I do a happy little monster and I do some fast facts. So check those out, as well as the Wednesday Wraith videos. And until next time, stay safe and keep searching.
The Fedora Files.
Check out fedoracrt.com today.